Good evening, Gabor and Daniel.
Hello.
Hello. Hi.
Hi. Thanks for joining us again on Guidely, Gabor. And I want to start with asking both of you, maybe first about Hello Again, your program for parents and their adult child. What led you to it and what is it? And I think it's also your next book.
Yes, and we hope a podcast as well.
Daniel, would you like to answer first, Daniel?
Yeah, well, I mean, in terms of how it came to be, we were invited by a friend of ours who was running a retreat center in British Columbia to lead something together. And it occurred to us that a topic we knew a lot about, not that we were experts in it or had figured it out, but it was territory that we had been navigating for a long time, is the relationship between us, and specifically rebooting, re-upping, refreshing our relationship now that I was a grown-up. And as we thought about it more and started to develop this and did our first workshop, we realized that everyone is dealing with this stuff and no one's talking about it. If you go into any bookstore, how many shelves are there about parenting from conception until college drop-off? There's shelves about saying goodbye to your dying parents or grieving them. There's even books about, recovering from abuse. But what about just what we all do for so much of our adult lives, which is just to coexist in the world with either the people who brought us into it or the people we brought into it ourselves. And it's complicated and it's rich. And so we just started, putting it on stage and sharing what we could see about it. And we've been developing that material now for the past 6 years. We've done the workshop several times. And, we have some videos on YouTube about it. And it's always a very stimulating, exciting, and inspiring thing to watch people expand the possibilities of what that relationship can be after so long of building habits that maybe aren't that satisfying, or maybe are getting tired. So that would be my synopsis. What else do you have to say, Dad?
I only add that it's an ongoing process. So it's not like we've completed the work. It's just that it's work that we're constantly engaged in. And so it's a workshop that we'll be doing at Omega in New York at the end of October, again in Vancouver in November, elsewhere next year. But as we do these workshops, we also have to continue to work on our own issues, and that'll be the subject of our next book.
So if I may ask, about the personal dynamic between the two of you. I think you had shared some stories, whether it's the birthday song or whether it's other stories about the dynamic between you that I personally deeply resonated. I can see the dad in the story, and I'm also a son, and have gone through my own journey with my parents, mostly with my dad, but now with my daughters, trying to really be intentional about setting up a new relationship where everybody is more mature, or we think of ourselves as more mature, and we try to be intentional about what kind of relationship do we want to have.
Mm-hmm.
If you're willing to share some stories and anecdotes on what led you to that point where you can actually co-author a book.
Well, actually, what led us to it is the recognition that our relationship was rather loose and it did not have an intention. We just kind of took it for granted. And what we learned is that to build a new relationship based on two adults, mutually respectful, but who still have a father-child or parent-child relationship, you have to have intention. You just can't let it slide and hope that it'll take care of itself. In some blessed families, it does, but in many cases, certainly in our case, it doesn't just automatically take care of itself. We need intention, we need some structure, we need some agreed upon ways of communicating about our issues. So it requires attention and constant attention to that intention, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, it's remarkable how quickly and easily, even after we've been working on it for all these years, it can so easily and quickly, like in the blink of an eye, slide back into old what we could call toxic dynamics. I don't know if we want to judge them as toxic, but they're no fun. They're
Painful,
unpleasant, they're painful, they're hurtful for both of us. We've had a few of these instances recently where I can see myself perceiving him and what's happening in the present moment through a lens that comes from a long time ago. Now, you know, as anyone who reads The Myth of Normal will learn, and probably people already know this, our old traumas can be triggered by anything that's happening in the present moment. So, you know, if I'm married, my spouse might remind me, you know, an interaction might remind me of feelings I haven't had since I was 2 or 3. And you're dealing with your parents and you're an adult, it's actually the same person who's triggering you, but they're not the same person. They're much older now, and you're not the same person. I'm not the same person. So that I experience it as a kind of time warp. You know, you could almost put the Rocky Horror Picture Show song on and do the dance. It's surreal. And if there isn't a common language to retrieve the present moment and have a common language to acknowledge, okay, we're sliding into a kind of time warp, it can get out of hand very quickly. And even for us, and I would even say especially for us. So yeah, we don't hold ourselves out to have solved anything, but we do know the territory quite well, I think. And the more of these breakdowns we have, and the more ways we see, oh, that's where we lost the thread, you know, that's where we went off, and take sort of individual responsibility and mutual responsibility, we get better at repairing it even more quickly, with less acrimony, with less story, less drama, and just get back to what our actual intention is, which is to love each other, to play with each other, to collaborate, which we happen to be doing. Not everyone writes books together, but we do. Has a sort of a home base that you want to be able to get back to as quickly as possible.
So how was it to write a book together? Like, was it you write this chapter and I write this chapter, you do, I build the, what was the dynamic?
No, it was more organic than that. So, you know, clearly the most of the ideas and concepts in the book come from my own work and experience as a physician and healer, and also my own particular journey. But the writing itself was a very mutual and interactive, and by the end, a kind of playful process.
Yeah.
Where I might begin by writing a chapter, Daniel would clean up the language, make it more reader friendly, tell me where I'm being redundant, tell me where I'm being too heavy, too abstruse, or perhaps too unnecessarily scientific in my language, or too compulsive about having to prove every point by including every study ever done about everything. You know, literally the manuscript, it's a very big book, but the original manuscript was twice as long as what you're holding in your hand.
Wow.
But anyway, so then Daniel would send it back to me. I would then rework it where I wasn't happy with the language, and we would mutually agree, and basically would punt the chapters back and forth to each other until we're both completely satisfied with it, and agreed on every word. And sometimes Daniel also, when I was kind of stuck on how to elaborate on a concept or even begin it, Daniel would actually write the beginning of the chapter to give me a pathway to move into the subject material. And throughout the book, beginnings and endings are kind of his specialty, and not exclusively, and not only, but that's how it tended to work. So it was a very mutual, interactive, playful, and of course, sometimes emotionally very challenging process.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say that another thing I had my eye on is this accessible to everybody, as many people as possible, including people who are not already familiar with Gabor's work, and people who may not already think of themselves as traumatized or be interested in therapy, but they just want to read a book about why everyone's so sick and tired in this society, and about how our society is structured. Maybe they're interested in a critique of capitalism. Maybe they want to learn about the latest science, you know? So I was looking out for places where Gabor, where my father or dad might assume that his argument has been made. But I wanted to be more generous to the reader and say, okay, let's really look at the counter arguments. Let's make sure that it's airtight and rigorous and accessible. And what I would say about the drama of the process is everything we were just talking about in terms of Hello Again. Writing this book was a beautiful kind of scaffolding for doing some of that work. Because we had a project, you know, because we were making this thing, this solid thing, which we knew we wanted to put out into the world, something became more important than my bullshit or his bullshit. I mean, I'll speak for my own. I don't know if he has any, but I know I do. And when we get into a drama, we couldn't afford to stay there. We had to get back to the bigger intentions. It wasn't about us. It was for the world. And I felt like I was serving his message. And I was really intent that this book finally get written, because he'd been putting off writing it or struggling with writing it for like 10 years. So for me as a son, it gave me some scaffolding to set boundaries I'd always had a hard time setting. Like, hey, you don't get to talk to me that way. Like, hey, I'm not your dumping ground for your anxiety. I see you're upset. Let's talk tomorrow. Or I would send him a chapter and he's immediately, you know, taken aback that I've changed something he liked. And I said, okay, sleep on it. So, and at my best, I did it calmly, which I could never do before because I was too wrapped up in old patterns of rebellion and argument. And then on the other side of the map, or the flip side of that is, I got to see, oh, I'm reacting like a 2-year-old. I'm acting like daddy's disapproval is a slap across the face in front of the family. When it's just my 76-year-old father at the time, who is tired and anxious about his book, and he has a different opinion than me. And he's a man who's treating me like a man. And we're just two men, I'm in my 40s, and it brought me back into the present. So having that structure, I mean, I wouldn't recommend it to everybody to write a book with your son or with your father, but doing a project together, we found, I think, created an external frame, a scaffolding, a structure, so that, you know, like when you set up, what's it called? Lattices, so that vines can grow, ivies can grow, you know, sweet peas or whatever. It was like that. It was like this structure for us to really come into the present and get to know each other as we are now. And by the end, like Dad said, I think we found a shared voice and a real playful, loving atmosphere in the collaboration.
I am really touched by this, and deep, it resonates with me, and something to look for, gives me hope. And Daniel, I know you're on a side of the road. Do you mind, before leaving us, reading a couple of paragraphs, and then I would love to dive a little deeper with Gabor,
yeah, sure,
into the book.
All right, so I'm reading from chapter 25, which is the first chapter in our final section of 5 sections. And this is the section on healing. And in this first chapter, we just take a first cut at defining what healing is, to distinguish it from some of the misconceptions about it, and to invite people into a new relationship with it, and to explore what is it want from us, what conditions promote kind of healing, what kind of attitudes promote it. So this is from page 363. Any movement toward wholeness begins with the acknowledgement of our own suffering and of the suffering in the world. This doesn't mean getting caught in a never-ending vortex of pain, melancholy, and especially victimhood, a new and rigid identity founded on trauma, or for that matter, healing. True healing simply means opening ourselves to the truth of our lives, past and present, as plainly and objectively as we can. We acknowledge where we were wounded, and as we are able, perform an honest audit of the impacts of those injuries as they have touched both our own lives and those of the others around us. This can be exceptionally difficult for myriad understandable reasons. No matter the degree of discomfort our illusions cover over, the truth hurts, and we don't like hurting if we can help it, even if we sense that something better could lie on the far side of the pain. As Nadezhda Mandelstam wrote in her searing memoir of life under Stalinism, Hope Against Hope, quote, "It is very difficult to look life in the face," end quote. Many of us will be ready to seek the truth only once we have concluded that the cost of not doing so is too high, or once we become sufficiently acquainted with our own ache of longing for the real. The Greek playwright Aeschylus was exquisitely on point when he had his chorus declare, "Zeus has led us on to know the helmsman lays it down as law that we must suffer into truth.
That definition of healing for me is, and we'll talk definitions in a second, but Daniel, I want to thank you for reading this, and thanks for joining us for this opening. Wow, that definition of healing for me is such a change, and I feel like, Gabor, you're making a lot of definitions that in many ways shatter mindsets and paradigms that we have brought up based on throughout life, and that's on genetics, and that's on many different things. But so before we dive into definitions, I want to ask you, from your perspective today on us as a culture and individuals you meet, what is working? Like, what, I want to focus on the good for a second. I know you have a lot of observations about what can be better and needs to change and perspective, but I want to take for a second a look at what works.
Well, having just written the book with the subtitle that has toxic culture.
And I asked the question.
So it's a good question, is what I'm saying. So look, certainly, as much as technology can be our undoing, we have amazing technology. We have amazing science. We have amazing medical breakthroughs. We have beautiful art. We have magnificent forms of music in all realms of musical creation. You know, we have what we saw at the beginning of COVID, although less towards the end, a real desire on our part of people to connect and to support one another through difficulty and through challenging times. And those are eternal, and they're certainly present with us now. We are developing. We also have lots of examples of people overcoming tremendous suffering despite all kinds of traumatic experiences. So we have the observation and the reality of healing that's available to us. I think we also have, what's good is also, I think most people, if you ask most people, when do they feel more themselves, or when do they feel more at peace and at ease in their bodies? Is it when they're being kind and generous and open to others, or is it when they're being grasping and selfish and aggressive? And most people would say they feel much better and much more themselves in the first rather than the second state. So that says to me something about the nature of human nature that I think is also on our side. So there's all these good things. And above all, there's always because we're creative creatures, and, you know, as the Tanakh says, or the Old Testament says, that we're created in the image of God. We are creators. So that potential for creativity is always with us as well. So those are the good things that I see.
I want to offer one other good that I see in today's society, is that we're ready for a change.
Yeah,
we're ready for books and approaches like the one you offer. Where I think, you know, quite a few years ago, we were definitely not ready. So I think whether it's through suffering, or whether through pain, or the collective trauma that we keep bringing on ourselves, we're pushing ourselves through the birth canal to the point where we're ready for something different.
I think that's true. And I think that addresses a point that we make in our last chapter, which is the benefits of disillusionment. I think people are getting disillusioned, and often people think disillusioned is a bad thing. You know, it's disappointing. You know? No. I mean, I always say to people, would you rather be illusioned or disillusioned? Would you rather see the world through some false lens, or would you see reality the way it is? And I think because of the contradictions and stresses in modern society, more people are just losing their illusions, which means that they start to look for alternatives and different answers and different understandings. So that's also a positive for sure.
Yeah. So I want to dive into some definitions, because I feel like even in the title of the book, normal and thought seat and culture, you're using different words, and throughout the book you redefine some of them, including truth, that I found a really profound definition. And if you're willing to, and I know you've said this many times, how do you define trauma? But I would love to, and you also bring some other definitions in the book. I would love to hear again and put it in the right frame. What is trauma? What is normal? What is thought seat? What is we talked about healing and truth.
Yeah, I think definitions are really important, because we use these words, but you know, one person uses the word God and they mean some vindictive entity that will punish people and condemn them to perdition for eternity. You know, somebody else uses the word God, and it's a loving, all-encompassing, benign entity, and you know, so they use the same word. So I think definitions are very important, and same thing is true for the words that you highlighted, including trauma. So you know, I'm a former English teacher, and I'm very interested in language, and so that I began with the meanings of words. So trauma originates in a Greek word for wound or wounding. So that's what it means. Trauma is a wound. Now, which means that trauma is not what happened to you. So in my case, the trauma is not my experiences as an infant under the genocidal Nazi occupation of Hungary in my first year of life. That wasn't the trauma. The trauma is what the wound that I sustained internally. In other words, how those external events affected how I felt about myself, how I felt about the world, and how I reacted to things based on the imprint of the past. So the trauma is not what happens to you. The trauma is not the war. It's not the genocide. It's not the sexual abuse. It's the results of those events on you inside of yourself. It's the wound, which is an important distinction, and it's also a very positive one. Because if the trauma is what happened to me 77 years ago, then it's over. It will never not have happened. But if the trauma is the wound that I sustained, what I made that mean as a 11-month-old, as a 1-year-old, well, that meaning can be changed. I can change the meaning. I can give a different meaning to my experience. And I don't have to be defined or limited by what happened to me whenever it was in the past. So trauma is not what happened to you. It's what happened inside you. And it's a wound. And then wounds have certain characteristics, like if they're open and raw, they really hurt. Every time you touch them, it's like you're being tormented afresh all over again. And trauma is also like a scar that forms over a wound, which is a thick covering so that you don't feel, but then you lose feeling, you lose connection with your feelings. A scar is rigid, it's not flexible, so that people traumatized have rigid responses rather than being emotionally flexible. And trauma also, or sorry, scar tissue also doesn't grow like healthy flesh, so that traumatized people tend to get stuck at the stages in life where they were traumatized. So these are the characteristics of wounding, which are also the characteristics of trauma, which is the word that originates from the word for wounding. So that's how we define trauma.
Right. You know, I keep seeing quotes about, so where lights enter, right? That's the crack through which light enter, and the ability to really open that, whatever we created, so that the healing can come in. And we'll talk a little bit more about later on about what can be done, what practical tools you offer in the book to help the healing. You're not just identifying the core issues, you're actually giving some practical tools to be used on a journey for healing.
That's true, but to tell you the truth, it would be, I think, a mistake for people to read the book of the first 4 parts being the problem being laid out and analyzed and illustrated, and the longest part, which is on healing, in distinction to each other, because I think that a big part of healing is recognizing the problem. In fact, the Buddha said that once you understand the source of your problem, you're taking the first big step towards healing. So I think that understanding that we try to provide in the bulk of the book is essential for the healing process. So it's not just a bunch of tools that here's what you do. It's also how do you understand the world? How do you perceive yourself? How do you understand your history? And the biggest hope I have for the book is that people get to recognize themselves, that they get to remember themselves, that they get to really know themselves. And that's the function of the whole book, not just the healing part.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to make sure that we
Yeah,
also have the healing part.
Of course.
Can you talk about truth for a second? How
Yeah.
do you define truth?
Yeah. So there are facts and then there's truth. So I know all kinds of instances where people can speak all kinds of facts without uttering a word of truth at all. And that's because truth is bigger than just the intellectual mind. The intellectual mind cannot perceive truth. It can perceive facts, which are important for truth, but they're not sufficient. I think truth is, there's an interesting story in the New Testament. Jesus is taken in front of Pontius Pilate, who's the Roman governor of Judea. And, I'm not concerned with how accurate the story is. I'm concerned with the meaning in it. And so Pontius, they have this conversation. And Pontius said, well, who are you? And he said, I'm here to speak the truth. And Pontius says, what is truth? And you know what Jesus' answer is?
No.
He doesn't answer at all. And that's the answer, because Pontius Pilate represents the egoic, power-driven, controlling mind. And Jesus knows better that that mind cannot grasp the truth because it's not an intellectual concept. So the truth, no, physiologically, actually, our brains up here is one brain. We also have a brain, a nervous system that's connected to the heart. And that also has a truth divining capacity. When somebody says, I knew in my heart, it's not just a metaphor. They knew it in their heart. And also, of course, there's the gut has been called the second brain, because such thing as gut feelings. Now, when the three are aligned, we have some approximation of truth. So that truth is like not so much a fact, but an experience that involves all our capacities. And it's very difficult to define it in purely intellectual terms. It's like trying and define love without the heart. Truth is, I think, much the same way.
Yeah, it's feels like, there are all those analogies of what you see from different angles, the visual, and the facts is what you see from one angle or another angle, where the truth is really a perspective that is much more holistic. That is,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I know, we're in the. I think I said earlier, I feel like you shatter a lot of mindsets and limiting beliefs in mental health as a whole, but also you really bring together mental health and spirituality, if I can call it. And one of those is that, and I know you've been asked quite a bit about it, is the genetical impact on mental illness or general illness. And I have to admit that when I heard your answer, and when I read about it, it's really mind-blowing and relieving somewhat, because so can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So when Bill Clinton was the president, they inaugurated the Genome Project, and President Clinton very optimistically said that with this now we're going to figure out the code for life, and this will help us heal all kinds of diseases. Now we know, decades down the road, that nothing of the sort has happened, where genetic information has helped us heal or understand very little about the nature of disease. And that's because most diseases are not genetically in nature. So there are genetic diseases, rarely. Runs in my family, muscular dystrophy. If you inherit the gene, you'll have the disease. My mother and my aunt both died with it. They had the gene. and it affected their health and certainly shortened their lives. But those diseases are rare. And most illnesses, even if they have a genetic component, like for example, there are breast cancer genes, but out of 100 women with breast cancer, only 7 will have the gene, 93 will not. And out of 100 women with the gene, not all of them will get the disease. In other words, for most conditions, whether of mind and body, they're not genetically determined. Even if there are genes that are predisposed, they don't predetermine necessarily. They might increase the risk, but they don't predetermine in most cases. Now, when it comes to mental illness, for all the hoopla around schizophrenia gene or addiction gene or alcoholism gene or this gene, ADHD genes, they don't exist. Nobody has ever demonstrated that if you have this gene, you'll have this disease, or if you don't have this gene, you won't have it. Nobody's ever demonstrated that if you have this group of genes, you'll have this disease, and if you don't have it, you won't. As best I can tell, and the literature is sort of evolving all the time, they certainly have demonstrated that there's a large nebulous group of genes that the more them you inherit, the more likely you are to have any mental health condition, whether it's schizophrenia or addiction or ADHD or depression, anxiety. And maybe some groupings will veer you more towards one direction than another, but that's a very far distance from saying that they cause the disease. What these genes seem to be for, as best I can tell, since we know that people with the same genes in different environments will turn out very differently, as best I can tell, what these genes do represent is a high degree of sensitivity. Now, the more sensitive you are, the more affected you're going to be by the environment. That means that if a very sensitive child is brought into a beautiful, nurturing, non-stress, supportive environment, they're just going to be a marvelous, intuitive, creative, confident, joyful individual. But if that same sensitive child is brought up in an environment where they have to endure pain, they're going to hurt more. Because the more sensitive means, again, meaning of words, sensitive from the Latin for sincere, to feel. The more sensitive you are, the more you feel, the more difficulty, adversity there is, the more pain you're going to have. And what my argument is about many physical illnesses and most mental health conditions, these are responses to pain in one way or another. So the genes may make you more sensitive, but from there, it's the environment that decides which way it's going to go. So that's what I say about genetics and mental illness. Now, this is not the mainstream point of view in medicine, but I don't think most people bother to look at the evidence. They just sort of repeat the mantra, you know?
So this brings me really to, I don't know if you saw the Washington Post today, but I guess a health panel is calling for routine anxiety screening for adults between the ages of 19 and 64.
Yeah,
that's today's Washington Post.
Wow.
And I
look at what do they hope to accomplish? I'm sorry, do they say?
Well, to early diagnosis, because I think they say that you can go undetected for years. So you know, that's why I said that's the positive. I see that as a positive because that's what makes everybody is realizing that something needs to change. It's not necessarily the diagnosis.
I see as a move of desperation, because there's a reason why more people are anxious. There's a reason why more kids are killing themselves. There's a reason why more kids are diagnosable with this or that condition. Those reasons have to do with social conditions. They have to do with how children are raised. They have to do with human relations. They have to do with the loss of community. They have to do with the stress in society. So rather than pathologize something, which is
label.
I see the attempt here. I see they're trying to help people. That's good. But for God's sakes, let's not focus on the symptom here.
Right.
Let's look at what's driving it. There was an article in the New York Times 3 weeks ago now, front page, about this teenager who's on 10 different psychiatric medications. 10. They should probably not be on more than one, if at all. If we looked at the environment, if we understood that it's the environment, the cultural environment in today's society that drives all this despair, that we diagnose as depression or anxiety or self-cutting or addictions, these are all forms of despair. Though
Right.
that despair does not arise out of nothing, it reflects how people are living in a certain environment. So focusing simply on the identified pathology is to lose the perspective that we have to really look at the causes. So, okay, it's a well-meant attempt, but I think it's a sign of desperation
Absolutely.
and a sign of a larger vision of what might actually be possible.
Absolutely. So to me, we're as a culture, not only we're toxic, we're in a collective depression and anxiety
Yeah.
as a culture. And you define depression beautifully. Um, so I want to ask you to repeat your definition for depression, but also talk about healthy expression of anger and other emotions, because we just don't know how to express.
Yeah. Well, it's not that we don't know, it's that we're made to forget it. Like, do you have children?
Yeah, I have 3 daughters.
Great. Have you ever met a one-day-old baby that doesn't know how to express their emotions?
Oh yeah, they know. We just mute them.
Yeah. So it's not that we have to learn anything, it's that we have to come back to ourselves that knew how to do it in the first place. And so the first question we have to ask is, why did we lose that capacity? As because you're right, we do lose that capacity. But why? It's because the environment expects us not to be ourselves. It expects us. Now, one of the developmental needs of children, so in the book, there's a chapter on I think it's called The Irreducible Needs of Children, which is just what does the child need for healthy development? And if you take away those requirements, if you don't meet them, there's not going to be healthy development. Now, one of the requirements for healthy human brain development and emotional development and maturation is that the child is able to experience all their emotions. Now, we're given emotions by nature. We have circuits in our brain for love, and we have circuits in our brain for anger. There's a reason why we have a circuit in the brain for anger, because it's a necessary boundary defense. If I were to intrude on your boundaries, even in this conversation, at some point you might want to get angry and say, no, you don't talk to me that way. That's just healthy anger. It's a boundary defense.
Right.
Now, and animals, they all know how to express anger. You try and stray into the territory of a particular animal, you're going to get, my space, get out. That's healthy anger. It actually avoids violence very often because it sets the boundary. Now, when a child is taught that good little kids don't get angry, that's not what the message is. The message is angry little kids don't get loved. Now, the child is desperate to be loved, so he'll push down the anger. Now, what's another word for pushing down? Depressing. So and what do people depress? What do they push down who are depressed? They push down their emotions. Why do they push them down? Because that's how they adapted to their environment where they were growing up. So even that pushing down was a survival technique, not conscious. I mean, if the child was conscious, he'd say to himself, oh, my parents really can't handle my anger, so I'm just going to express it. But once I grow up, it's not conscious. The child is desperate to belong, to be accepted, to be attached to. The brain will automatically push down the emotions that the parents can't handle. And then the kid is diagnosed with depression 10, 20, 30, or 40, or 50 years later. But it began as an adaptation.
And you talk beautifully in the book about the attachment as a fundamental need,
Yeah,
and the authentic expression as a fundamental need,
yeah,
and the conflict between the two, because we're trying to stay attached and we sacrifice one for the other, or we think we do.
exactly. So in this example that I just gave, the child may be angry, and children get angry, they get frustrated, they get angry, So there's nothing wrong with that. But if the child gets the message that their anger is not acceptable to the parents, they will push down that anger, which means they'll disconnect from their own emotions. Now, that's authenticity, is being in touch with ourselves, and auto, the self. We're in touch with ourselves. We're authentic. Now, in nature, where we evolved for millions of years. And for even as our species, we lived for most of our existence. Just how long does a creature survive who's not in touch with their gut feelings? So that just as attachment is essential for survival, so is authenticity, being in touch with ourselves. But if there's a conflict between the two for the small child, there's no contest. Because without the attachment, they can't live. They simply can't. They can't thrive. Even if they physically thrive, they can't thrive emotionally. But literally, they can't thrive without the attachment relationship. So what the child does is unwittingly sacrifice the authenticity. Now, whenever I speak to groups, as I did yesterday here in Los Angeles, I ask them a simple question. And those of you listening right now, you might try to do this exercise yourself. Here's the question. Have you ever had an experience of having a strong gut feeling about something and ignoring it and being sorry afterwards? So you have a
Yes.
strong gut feeling, you don't act on it, and you regret that afterwards. Now, in any room of 100 people, 90 will put their hands up at least. Well, what they're telling me is that in their childhood, they had to make that decision between authenticity and attachment. They had to choose belonging and being acceptable to others at the cost of giving up their connection to themselves. And that loss of connection is the essence of trauma, number one. And number two, it exacts a heavy cost in terms of physical and mental health. But it's almost ubiquitous in our culture.
It's so deep because it's not, we look at it as adults or, and look at an isolated moment.
Yeah.
But the ability to see that in such a perspective of time and see the seed that was planted when we were so young.
Yeah.
And as you suggest in the book, go through it again and bring it up to light.
Yeah.
It's really profound. So I feel like I'm only halfway my questions, and I feel like I can go forever, and I want to make sure that we leave enough time for some people to ask you questions directly. But I want to ask you about the 4 A's.
Yeah.
As a journey for change. If you're willing to talk about it a little bit.
Sure. So in the final section of the book, which is called Pathways to Wholeness, which is also the longest, we have more chapters on the healing part than any other part of the book. We provide many forms of working with oneself, but one of them is what we call the 4 A's. And actually, Amir, if I was to write the book again, I would make it 5 A's. I'll let you know though which one I left out. But we talk about healthy anger. So anger. Now, I've already talked about why that's necessary. Healthy anger is a boundary defense. And the implications of repressing emotion is not just that you'll be depressed later on. They go far beyond that. Because of the mind-body unity, the scientifically demonstrated mind-body unity that we outline in this book. Mm-hmm. The unity, by mind-body unity, I mean is that the emotional apparatus is not separable from immune system, from our hormonal system, and from our nervous system. It's one unit, all designed to maintain the well-being, integrity, and survival of the organism. So healthy anger is a boundary defense. You know what else is a boundary defense? The immune system is a boundary defense. And as a good boundary defense, it'll allow in what is healthy, but it'll keep out what is toxic. That's the task of the immune system. The immune system is part and parcel of the same apparatus as the emotional system. When you're repressing your emotions, you're actually affecting your immunity as well, which is a risk factor for autoimmune disease and for malignancy. And this is not my fanciful, insightful interpretation. Science has shown this. So,
healthy expression of anger.
Healthy is the first A. Okay. Now, or I don't know what order we give it in, but
the authenticity was first, and
yeah. Okay. So now authenticity we already talked about. So that need to be in touch with ourselves, which means actually paying attention to what our bodies are saying, and paying attention to when we don't pay attention. because our bodies are talking to us all the time,
Mhm.
and our emotions are talking to us. But we tend to ignore our emotions for the sake of being accepted. We tend to ignore our bodily messages for the sake of being accepted and saying, but no, a lot of people, it takes an illness to bring them back to authenticity. I don't recommend going that way if we can possibly avoid it. So authenticity, being ourselves, is essential. Acceptance, which means that not that we tolerate a situation, but we accept it the way it is. That we accept that this is the way it is right now. So acceptance doesn't mean you have to put up with it. It doesn't mean you have to tolerate it. It means not denying that this is how it is, not even resenting that this is how it is, but so this is how it is. What do I want to do about it? It's only from a state of genuine acceptance can we actually move forward to change the situation.
That's so profound. And agency was the fourth A.
Yeah, and so agency,
I thought was profound. Yeah.
Yeah, so agency is the capacity that we all have to be the agents, to be the arbiters of our own lives, of our own healing. Now, again, the Western medical approach has to do with cure rather than healing. So it's about, you've got this disease, here's the pill or here's the operation that's going to maybe cure you or at least maybe prolong your life. But that's not healing. Healing is becoming whole again. Now, only I can direct my own return to wholeness. And that's where you need agency. In other words, you have to seize the reins yourself. You can't be a passive participant in your own life. And when you look at what stresses people, one of the factors that stresses people is loss of control. So agency is regaining the power to make the decisions within whatever circumstances you're in. Now, some people's circumstances are more expansive, others are more limited. But within whatever circumstance, we need to have the agency to make the decisions about ourselves and our relationships and so on. Now, the fifth A that I didn't mention is awareness. Because without awareness, none of the other four work. So it was a rather egregious omission. Perhaps in some future edition of the book, we'll correct that. But
we'll all pencil.
Those are the four A's, but they all imply awareness, and that would be the fifth one.
We'll all handwrite.
Write in awareness with you.
Write it in, and you do have 5 in the book, 5 compassions. But I won't get into that.
Okay.
I think agency is such a observation, because really taking back the power in the healthy way is really the first step to any healing journey, where we stop blaming others or circumstances or whatever, but really taking it back to ourselves. And a lot of people talk about it, how to implement that. That's so I have one final question, if I may.
Let me just say one more thing.
Yeah.
That what you just said is so important, because it may be that, as I show in the first chapter, that certain imprints of my infancy during the genocide had impacts that showed up even 7 decades later in my relationship with my wife. But without agency, I'm simply a victim of the past. So agency means that I take responsibility, not for what happened to me then, but for how I relate to what happened to me in the present moment. So agency is absolutely the key to healing. I just want to reinforce that.
Yeah. And in the story with your wife, where you land in Vancouver after a great talk in Philadelphia, I don't want to tell the story for you, but
Well, let the people read about it. But it's
it's a beautiful story about.
It's a story where the past showed up in the present, the tyranny of the past, as Peter Levine calls it. And I can't keep. Well, as this is Daniel's line in the book, but Hitler made me do it. Just doesn't wash. 70 years later. At some point you have to take responsibility, no matter what happened way back then.
But it's beautiful with all the work you've done that you still take ownership of that trigger and how you respond, and you can see how it relates to that trauma early in your life. That's, to me, that's profound. So I have one question before we open open it to questions, and if people want to raise their hand, we will let people in as we go through. My question is really, I want to zoom out and ask you, what was your intention? What do you see as the impact of this book to be in the world? Because for me, it's going to be incredible, but I want to hear what if there was an intention.
There was an intention, you know, Amir. There's so much suffering and pain in the world, and I just wanted to give people a map to understand it. The suffering they create for themselves, the suffering we create for each other. I want to create a map for people to understand their experience. And with a map, you can orient yourself. You can find a way through. Without a map, you're just lost. So if I had the single intention, it would be to give people some plausible explanation and observation of what's happening to us, so that we can actually sit down and start saying, well, what's the way out together? So that was the intention.
Yeah. So I think I love the analogy to a map, because it's a navigation system. It tells you where we are.
Yeah.
And where do we want to go, or where we can go. Not necessarily everybody can choose for themselves, right?
That's right.
And I think this book, no doubt, will touch many people around the world. And thank you for writing it. Thank you for sharing it. And if you're okay, I would love to hop on. So we'll take 3 or 4 questions, if that's okay with you, Gabor.
That's fine, of course.
And I do want to mention, we here in Guidely, we're a community, and we're we have guides from all over the world that support people on their journey. We will have 2 integration sessions after this workshop with 2 guides. One of them will be soon graduating your year-long program, Kelly Carpenter and Kamala Rode, who is a master coach and teach compassion cultivation training based on the Stanford program. So both of them comes from different perspective and will offer 3 integration sessions after today, and we will try and do a quick intro to them at the end. I feel honored and humbled that we share this space with you. Every time we do this, I feel, okay, now we can start. Like we touched the surface, and now we can start. So thank you for taking the time. Even in LA, it's late in the day. So thank you so much. And we really look forward to integrating all of that. I feel like there is so much wisdom that, is only good as a letter on a page if it's not being then implemented and integrated into the body. Right. So I want to say thank you, and I want to invite Kelly and Kamala, who will do the integration sessions after that. I want to say thank you so much, Toda, Dr. Gabor Maté, for sharing your wisdom and insights with us today. Really appreciate it. Those are Kamala and Kelly, who will be holding the integration sessions, one on Thursday and one next week. So
thank you, everybody, and take care.
Thank you, Gabor. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Bye-bye. So for those of you who wants to get to know real quick Kamala and Kelly, I would love for you to say maybe just a few words about the integration sessions that you're putting together. Kelly, your integration session is on Thursday, right?
Hi, yes, it is.
Hi.
Yeah, Thursday at 5 p.m.
Pacific.
Yes, Pacific.
Yeah. So how wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit about what that's going to look like? What do you plan? And maybe a little bit about your work with Gabor, because you are about to finish his year-long course. So would love to learn how you're going to incorporate that into a session.
Yeah, thank you. I actually have what I call the TASA method, which really parallels a lot of the compassionate inquiry that in the course that I'm taking with Gabor and his system of bringing that compassionate curiosity to our wounded, stuck, places. So I love what Gabor talks about as a roadmap, and I'm going to be bringing in some diagrams that I call the cause of suffering and the answers to them. So there's something that is very tangible in seeing it laid out in a diagram as well that goes along with the actual processes that we can bring ourselves through. I'm also going to be opening up to, it's called an integration session. So I'm going to be opening it up to work with people, right there in the group for those that might be interested in experiencing it.
That's beautiful. And you both are guides with Guidely, and Carmela, do you want to share your integration session is next week, right?
Yes, my integration session following Kelly's will focus on compassion and, embracing whatever we experience in the session. So also focusing on integrating the experiences that we have here and taking the focus on compassion and self-compassion on how we can be with ourselves in experiencing challenges.
That's really incredible. And you also have a course that you offer, compassion cultivation training.
And we actually, yes, Amir, thank you for mentioning that. We're going to offer that once on Saturdays starting in the new year. So maybe for you guys to look out, this is a Stanford created class on compassion cultivation. And we're going to offer this through Guidely beginning of the new year.
That's incredible. So I feel like I want to ask you, so by the way, for the audience here, we have events like this on a regular basis. We will have on October 21st, 2 doors to resilience, love and meditation, facilitated by Carmela and by Anil Chadwani, another guide, incredible dear friend and guide on Guidely. And in October, we are hosting Gabby Bernstein, and we have most likely another great guest in December. So really excited about this, and I would love for you guys to, Carmela and Kelly, to say a few words. What's your takeaway? How do you feel about this interview and the message that he brings? And if you had a chance to look at the book, I know, Carmela, you have, how do you feel about it?
Amir, I'm on chapter 8 right now, and I'm super, super excited because it's really personal to me. And I think it is absolutely life-changing. It's a game changer for me. I'm super excited listening to it at this point.
And I've purchased the book, but I haven't started it, and I'm really looking forward to. I mean, there's so many takeaways. I was writing madly. I always do every time I listen to Gabor, and I really get the pleasure of working directly with him every month. So, it's just always so rich to spend time with him. Yeah.
So one of the things that I find about his work is his delivery of complex issues, the way he delivers them and break it down to simplistic, very tangible and relatable terms, and then make everything seems so simple, and yet it's so complex. So there is something so beautiful about it. So I'm really grateful to have him tonight. Thank you for showing up tonight. Thank you for sharing your story. Thanks for listening. We would love to have you as part of our community. And we have a tradition when we do our workshops for everybody to, if you're willing to open your camera, unmute yourself for a second and say good night and thank you. And what a wonderful experience we had tonight, and a gift. So thank you all for showing.
I want to say thank you to Shendel and to you, Amir.
Thank
and
you,
to all
Kelly.
of the people behind the scenes that have made this happen.
I was going to say thank you, Carmela. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Shendel. Thank you, Devin. Thank you, Gaia.
Casey.
Thank you, Jamie. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.